Well, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching and listening anywhere around the world this evening or this morning or this afternoon, wherever you may be. Liam Hartery back with you today with a special number, episode 450 of the Simply Inspired podcast. That is quite surreal to say that, but it is true. I counted recently even. And today I'm very excited and honored and blessed actually to welcome a very special guest, a person who touches and contributes to the lives of a great many people. I am excited and honored to welcome Dene Donalds, mindfulness teacher, student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and as I've already mentioned, a person who offers mindfulness retreats, mindfulness teaching, to the people who need it most in many ways. And as Dean and myself were talking before we started recording, not someone who preaches to the converted, but somebody who takes mindfulness into prisons, into situations of people with learning difficulties, however you define that label. I don't like labels, but people who need it in those situations. I think into schools, into a number of different institutions. And so today we'll be finding more out about this lovely man, his own journey into Buddhism, and of course, the work he does, as well as a few broader topics on mindfulness and how it can help you, our viewers or listeners, because that is why we're both taking the time to create this talk today. And Dean, my friend, absolutely wonderful to be joined by you here this evening, our time this evening. So thank you so much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Absolutely. And I will say before we begin as well that I'm very excited to talk with you about so many things, but I must say, sitting in your presence now, I could almost forget that we're doing an interview and just sit with you and breathe because you do have that lovely presence. So I just reminded myself now, Liam, focus, we have an interview to do. So there we are. But that's testament to the practices, isn't it? Whether you realize it or not, I honestly mean it from my heart that you do exude that lovely warmth and joy and peacefulness. And I think that will certainly play a part in the work that you do and how people feel comfortable connecting with you. So that's nothing to do with the interview. I know I did say before we started, but I really mean it from my heart. And I don't say it to everyone, I mean, some people I sit down and I think, oh gosh, okay, I'm grateful for the practices today because I need to focus through this. But with you, it really is a joy. So thank you. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned before we actually started this, is to make the spiritual path accessible and relatable to all people, which is really what it's for. And I was feeling that the best way to do that is to talk about your journey in terms of what led you to the practices, what led you to Thich Nhat Hanh, as people refer to him, and how that aspect of your journey all began. So may we start there, please, Dean, my friend. Thank you.
You're welcome, William. You're very, very welcome. So, um, I'm second generation West Indian. My parents came across with the Windrush generation, and I was brought up on a council estate. I didn't have money, um, and I sort of thought success was about earning money, about having status, having not experienced that, and the world that I grew up in appearing to have valued that. So I did what I guess a number of us do. I worked hard. I found education a bit late. I was a soldier for a while, but I found higher education in my early 30s, got an MBA. That was everybody got an MBA have you got one, Liam? I think everybody in the world has got an MBA. No?
They they have these days, not for me, but they have most people have these days, haven't they? MVA, but no, it's still a valuable achievement, though, Dean, isn't it? I mean, it's don't knock it because many people in the world they don't have access to these kind of opportunities. So even though these days it might be a little bit mundane, then I wouldn't say so because many people never have a chance. But anyway, sorry, carry on. So MBA, yes, not for
That's
not for me, but for many people, yes.
that's true. So in my 30s, I got an MBA and was involved in a relatively successful uh, small to medium sized private company. Um, However, in order to to get the MBA to to manage, it was about 4.5, 5 million turnover, mainly spent on staff. So there's a large number of staff that needed to be cared for. Um, I was really stressed, and because of unresolved trauma, that stress was acted out with a great deal of anger sometimes. I was married at the time, a beautiful wife who I'm still married to, 40 years on, 40 years on. And at the time, a really small child, about 2 or 3. And I can remember one day arguing with my dear wife, uh, just through words and loud noises, and this little 3-year-old child looking up at her warring parents. Um, and I realized that this needed to stop. One of my friends who was going through similar issues, she was a solicitor, same position as myself, was working harder than was probably good for her to sort of scramble up this alleged ladder of success. And she said, I try meditation and it's really calmed my anger down. So I tried it, and my wife is very down to earth and says what she thinks. And after about 6 months, she would say to me, if I hadn't meditated, "Have you meditated today, Dean?" And she doesn't meditate herself, and she's very down to earth, says it like it is. But she could see this change of someone who had beginning to find a little bit of calm, a little bit of ease in the way that they were, in the mind and in the body. And I tried different traditions. Zoto Zen, I still practice Soto Zen and insight meditation. I love silence. However, after about 5 or 6 years of trying to find somewhere where I felt at home, I visited a place called Plum Village in the Dordogne, uh, where a Vietnamese Zen master named Thich Nhat Hanh was teaching and practicing and and leading socially engaged Buddhism. What does that mean? Actually applying spirituality, applying mindfulness, being in the present moment, offering love, joy, compassion, understanding, insight to real life situations, sometimes challenging situations. So I visited there, and a Zen master named Richard Baker, an American Zen master named Richard Baker, um, said that when he saw Thai for the first time, he reminded him of a snail, a cloud, and a piece of heavy machinery. And Thai did the same for me. Before he spoke, like Liam and I had been speaking, like you were saying, Liam, I'd read a number of his books, like you, and yeah, just by seeing him walk, by seeing him open a door, I realized that he embodied what he wrote about, what he did through the way he walked and through the way he opened doors. Martin Luther King, a very close friend of Thich Nhat Hanh, nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize, which he didn't receive. But Martin Luther King saw what many of us saw in Tubman, somebody that was able to bring ancient wisdom into contemporary crisis. And that was it. Like here I am, sort of 25, 30 years later, still following in Thai's tradition. I say Thai in Vietnamese, that means teacher. Thich Nhat Hanh. So yeah, and since then I never looked back really. I've become a lot happier, a lot calmer. I've walked away from what some might see as success. Nice car, big house, big salary. Um, but I've also walked away from a lot of stress, a lot of confusion in my personal life, because I didn't have the time to address some of my personal suffering, some of my family's suffering, uh, the nuclear family I lived in, and also the wider. So yeah, that's sort of, in a nutshell, that's the sort of story that led me to yeah, to practice in Thai's footsteps. Yeah.
Wow, that is remarkable, Dean. I mean, I was so looking forward to hearing that story because, as I said to you from my side, that was a total mystery. I see the work that you're doing today, but finding out what led you there, absolutely wonderful. And I know I'm focusing very much on the people that you help, but as I've already said, even in your presence, I mean, it's difficult to imagine you being angry or being stressed or any of those things now, although there will always be ups and downs in all of our lives. But and I don't mean to, I'm not putting you on a pedestal in any way, but I'm just saying that that is testament to the practices there. And that really makes the journey very relatable to people because it shows that it does take time and it shows that obviously the things that lead people to these places are things that we all experience. And as you say, anger, stress. Same for me. At one point, I used to joke about meditation. I used to say, "Well, I'm going to my AA meeting of anger and anxiety, AA." So I used to say, "They say, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to my AA meeting." But it was never alcohol, never really. Although I am part Irish, so that doesn't help. But it was never actually alcohol. It was always just particularly anger and anxiety in the beginning, anger and stress, or technically stress and anger, even for myself. So I relate to that very much, as many people will. But I have to ask though, Dean, at that time, when you were, well, as you say, you were starting with Soto Zen, then you moved into Plum Village, this tradition, and so forth. Did you ever think that 25 years later, I think you said that this amount of time later, you would still be practicing? I mean, was it really like that from the beginning? That when you say that I embodied the teachings and you were in awe of him, of course, of a cloud, a snail, a piece of heavy machinery. I have heard that as well, and I totally understand what Richard Baker meant actually from that. But in terms of your life, did you ever think that far ahead that you would still be practicing all of these years later, or that your life would go in a completely different direction of the kind of thing that you're doing now, if that makes sense?
Mm. No, very simple answer. No, I didn't. Um, it was sort of, I knew I was in crisis. I knew I was suffering. And I knew because I was suffering, I was contributing to my family's suffering. And to a degree, the organization that I was leading was suffering as well. And I just wanted to transform that suffering into something that was more productive. I didn't even think about peace really at the time. I just thought about currently I'm angry, I'm confused, and this is impacting on my circle of friends, family, and colleagues, and I need to change this. That was it, my friend. I just didn't think at all, even 2 or 3 years ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes sense. That does actually make sense. I think for a lot of people, I've certainly heard that it's very similar for myself as well. But again, I find that fascinating that this didn't come from the sort of lofty ambitions, but it came from these simple practices. And obviously, as I say, obviously it worked because of your presence and uh, well, you're still married, so it obviously worked. No, no offense, but I mean that is something that I think is also testament because these days, it's. But I know I'm joking. I'm partly joking with that, but sincerely, I can feel from you the difference that must have made to your relationships in general. Because even when you're saying about, your child being young, a very young age at that time. I mean, it sounds such a cliche, really. I don't mean it to, but that is a special time that never comes again, and no moments ever come again. But at the same time, I think it's wonderful in a way, if you don't mind me saying, that you were introduced to teachings at that time, because for a lot of people, these things pass them by these days. But anyway, so going a little bit deeper into your own practice and your own experience, I have seen photos of. I think I've seen one photo of you holding a flame, and I think tie hold, and things like this. And it gets me to thinking a little bit about your day-to-day practice at that time. So you had a family. Were you sort of living in the monastery, or you mentioned living in Plum Village? I have to be a little bit clearer on the actual timeline of what you were experiencing, because I speak to some people who were, fully fledged monks, other people who are more sort of on the lay practitioner side. I don't really like labels, by the way, Dean, in any shape or form. So I don't like to sort of look at anyone and say, well, you're this or you're that, because, we're all people. But in terms of one label I will use just for people's context who are listening to this, can you share with us a little bit about what the day-to-day practices looked like at that time, at that early time for you, please, my friend? Thank you.
Of course, of course. Yeah, yeah. So after I came back from village and was really was really changed by that. I only went for a week to from village. I returned many, many more times after that for longer periods. But I was very clearly, I know you're quite right, you don't like labels, but I was very clearly a layperson. I still continued with paying the mortgage,
Mm.
leading this little company I was telling you, being a dad, being a son. Um, However, rather just little things, and then I'll talk about the practices that got me there. But just little things, rather than just giving my daughter and my wife material things uh, to make them happy in my. I began to realize that I needed to give them my presence, that I needed to think about how I could spend more time, quality time, being present, like you and I at this current time, our quality time. We had about 15, 20 minutes, folks, before we came on this video. And we were just chatting, but it was very clear there was a connection because we were totally committed to each other. We were 100% present with each other. Would you say that's sort of what happened? That was my perception of what was going on.
Very, very much so. I mean, in actual fact, I was pleasantly surprised by the easy flow of that connection, actually, Dean. And I sincerely mean that. I was very pleasantly surprised. And don't get me wrong, I had heard you speak, and I've heard a few short videos and broadcasts and things. So I had the sort of vibe that you have a very positive presence. But at the same time, when I sat down with you, I thought, wow, I feel like for our audience's point of view, I feel like I've known this guy for ages. I mean, I feel like we've met before, and so that is also testament. And as I said earlier, I don't say that very often. I did say that when I interviewed Brother Freedom, or Michael Becker as he is now, because I did feel the same thing. I joked with him. I said, "Oh, we need to do an interview. I could just sit with you and just breathe." But I don't feel it very often. I mean, it's one of those things where that is testament to the practices, and it is testament to the point that you're making there about being present with all people, but especially with those that we love. Absolutely.
And so there is one of the practices, being present with whatever you're doing. And this is a pleasant moment, a pleasant exchange. However, tomorrow. I don't run the company I spoke of, but I've set up a few I've set up a few social enterprise, and I have some challenging face-to-face tomorrow. However, I can still be present with. I can still be aware of my beating heart, of the tenseness in my body, of my voice, and there's some decisions that I'm going to have to express. However, I can still offer those decisions with compassion, with real understanding. And I know the word isn't often used much, but with real love. So even though I might be delivering something that some people might not see as particularly helpful or helpful, I can do it with all of my presence, with all of my understanding, all of my love, all of my whatever it is I'm doing, whether it's my tax return or whether it's doing the washing. And how do I get to that? How do we get to that? We get to it by using methods to bring us back to the present moment. Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about using the breath. So just following the breath. That's all. That's it. That is it. Just so we just sit and we just follow. Let's try it. So we just sit and we just follow our in breath as it comes in. And when the breath goes out, we follow the out. And we just do that. When the mind wanders, which it will, so the mind wanders off might make a judgment about the practice. It might make a judgment about what we have to do in a minute or two's time for tomorrow. We might make a judgment about what's happened in the past, conversation, or whatever. We notice it. We don't judge ourselves. And just return to the breath. And we do that for a few minutes. Some of us do it for 5 or 10 minutes. By all means, end the session now if you wish. We do it. Some of us do it for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. And when I came back from Plum Village, I wasn't a particularly experienced practitioner, but I had been practicing for about 4 or 5 years. So I used to make sure that I used to get up half an hour early and just sit for 30 minutes, just doing what I described. Some people struggle with that. Some people have really active minds. And one of my dear mentors was one of those people, a brilliant academic, brilliant from Cambridge. And he said, Dene, sitting meditation, I do it, but my mind's all over the place. So what Thai teaches and what my mentor focused on was walking meditation. So he would walk. He'd walk mindfully, of course. He was a bit like the breath, so he'd follow each step. He'd be aware of his body. He'd be aware of the nature he was walking. And that would be another method. And you can also bring mindfulness to everyday tasks. So, so this will be the last practice I offer before I ask Liam to perhaps direct me in another in another way. Yeah, so another way is finding a mindfulness spell. I don't mean literal bell. So I used to drive quite a lot up until a few years ago, actually, because of my work. And so I always use the mindfulness bell as the steering wheel of my car. So after a meeting or after I've been to offer mindfulness in prisons or something else, then I'd get into my car. I might be a bit stressed. My body might be a bit tight. I might be running over a conversation or a dramatic incident that happened during the day. And as soon as I saw the steering wheel, I'd just smile and just do what we did 5 minutes ago, just follow my breath. And then I'd be in a better place to drive, a better place to manage my life.
Wonderful. I mean, you have such a beautiful way of explaining that, Dean, and as I've mentioned before, making that so accessible to people because, these days people do make things complicated on purpose so they can sell them. In particular, sorry if that sounds cynical, but it's really what goes on the internet. And as you say, these simple things, and I will say to our viewers, to our listeners, that even simple things become a joy. I mean, I'm here now drinking water. You have to drink a lot of water in Cyprus, but it's good to drink it anywhere, and that becomes a joy as well. Even these very simple things, and as you say, reminders. Personally, to ingrain it, I've always had different reminders around, including the fact I have a picture of Thai in my room actually to remind me. But even in recent times, I always keep on my phone a mindfulness reminder because I do a lot of work from my phone, and so it constantly buzzes of remember to breathe, remember. So there's all these simple things you can do. But I really like how you've illustrated that. And another thing you mentioned there, even if we move forward in time a little bit, because also one of the joys of this, by the way, is I'm not thinking, what will I say next? I'm just enjoying your presence. So I don't forget to say it all together. What you mentioned there, Dean, about running companies and about making difficult decisions and so forth from a mindful perspective, even if we're moving a little bit forward in time with this, I'd like to go deeper into that concept because one of the things, what I mean by that is a lot of people have the perception of mindfulness or meditation being something separate. And obviously, Thai, and in particular, one of the reasons I was so drawn to him, as well as the beautiful presence that he had, was also the practical aspect. I mean, it was and it still is the fact that this is in every moment of our lives. It's not something we kind of do over here. And to go deeper into that concept, I mean, you're talking about the corporate space or the company, the entrepreneurial space. I'm not sure exactly how you define that. But in other words, business, which is usually seen as ruthless and uncompromising and, very, also something that's very driven towards the future, really, and not really driven towards the present. And there's certain perceptions that I'm not going to say everyone has, but certainly culturally, they have become the norm. I would even go so far as to say that people feel within a lot of business related spaces that they have to be stressed. I mean, you were talking earlier of the stress being a byproduct, but people look at people going to a job interview. They feel that they have to be stressed in order to produce the result. Whereas you can actually go in and enjoy the time with that person. It will either gel with them, you'll either connect with them, or you won't. As in the workplace. And even if you don't, then there's ways of being mindful of that too, as you know. But I'd like to go deeper into the changes that people can make in the workplace because we are socially conditioned for that to have a certain mindset in a lot of companies, I feel. And as I've already said, the profits drive. I mean, the fact that you can do that, not just you personally, but anyone can do that compassionately, is a revelation to most people, to a lot of people. And people who know about mindfulness would be, okay, Liam, I get where you're going with this. But for people who are hearing this the first time, they think, wow, you don't have to be stressed. You don't have to get up in the morning and work yourself up and think, oh, I have to hit these targets. You don't have to, really go for the throat in a business deal. You don't have to do any of these things in that way. And this is why I did say earlier, Dean, that I don't want to put you on a pedestal knowing all the answers to everything. But at the same time, I knew some wider social topics would come up because this isn't just about your life. This is about everybody. And although the answer is simple because don't forget to breathe, I would like to go a little bit deeper into how that can apply in the workplace, in the corporate space, in any of these spaces where there's a heavy social condition, including the fact you mentioned earlier about the army and about soldier. And I remember thinking, wow, I mean, I would never think that today sitting with you, but um, Anyway, but the corporate space, what are some of your thoughts on that? I know it's quite a big topic, but I think it's very valuable to go into it a little bit deeper. Thank you.
Liam, thank you. Thich Nhat Hanh coined the phrase interbeing,
Mm,
interbeing.
yes.
And what he meant by that is everything is connected. So when my wife is happy, I'm happiness is not an individual matter. And if you take that further, um, you can't have this, a manual diary. You've got a manual. You can't have this diary without a cloud. You can't have this diary without a cloud. Because without the cloud, there's not going to be trees. Without trees, there's not going to be paper. Without some processing of the paper, there's not. Take that further. Take it further. Take it into the workplace. So without your employees, without your senior management team, without your board, without the directorate, the business won't run. So if there's compassion within you, and the compassion first has to be self-compassion, then that compassion can be embodied, like Thai embodied being a snail, in your workplace, for example. Many years ago, many years ago. I won't try to remember when it was. But uh, I was contacted by a chief exec of the largest at the time, the largest mental health NHS trust in the UK. And she wanted me to offer mindfulness to the workforce. Massive. But she said just about 60 people over 2 or 3 years. And because it was NHS, and I have worked in the NHS sort of in management and offering consultancy, etc. I thought, oh boy, there'll be lots of key performance indicators and lots of things like this. And she invited me in, sat me down. She'd obviously practiced mindfulness, and you can tell, like when I first smiled at Liam, I knew that you practice mindfulness. It was clear, and it was clear with the chief exec. And she said, Dean, what I want you to do is to help this trust to embody. When I see my senior management team walking through the door, I want to know that they understand how you embody mindfulness. When I see my psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, nurses, managers walk through the door, walk along the corridor, come into the board, I want to know that they understand and embody mindfulness. And then we got on to the KPIs to meet the funding that she needed to draw down in order for us to get it. But that was at the heart of what she wanted me to do. So I took the job because I could. I was at the stage where I didn't always need to take work that was offered. So, so that came from, I think, the understanding of interbeing, the understanding that we are all connected, and without everyone, everything, we're not going to achieve what it is we want the organization to achieve if we're leading. And just another thing on leadership, there's no way that you can have leadership, an individual leader. There needs to be informal and formal leadership throughout the interbeing organization. And so that means it needs to be modeled, embodied by everyone in the organization. And if you want to to do that, it means looking deeply at yourself first, being compassionate to yourself first, uh, embodying it, not just in the workplace, but at home. So you are that whole sort of being. And yes, difficult decisions often. Yes, we have to meet challenges. Yes, we have to meet the past decisions when we weren't compassionate, which might come back to to challenge us. However, the ultimate is a philosophy of interbeing, a philosophy of being self-compassion, to look deeply and to have some fun and to have some. I get away with so much because I've got quite a, I won't, I've got quite a good and wicked, some people would say wicked sense of humor, but that's who I am. So in the boardroom, you'll get that. So I don't yeah, I don't put myself in boxes. Wherever I am, you'll get that. Does that make sense, Liam? Is that sort of, yeah?
So much sense, Dean. I mean, it's actually very valuable, not only the interbeing, but even several smaller points you made there, particularly the self-compassion, because I can certainly understand that from my own experience, the idea of I used to feel, well, if I perform to this level, if I hit this target, then I'm good enough, and if I don't, then I'm not, and a very conditional approach to that. So another thing about Thai that really struck me is that revelation of, hold on, you mean that just by being here, then I'm worthy of, giving that compassion to myself. How does that work? And I remember now it feels quite natural, although I still have to keep an eye to make sure I'm doing it, even to this day. But I think that is also valuable because I've noted that a lot of people's um, shall we say, worldly success in that perception, success in companies and business and any of these things. And, when I'm working with athletes or anything that has a high performance basis, people forget that. I mean, people forget to the fact that, well, a few things you said there, self-compassion, joy, having fun, a number of these things that you mentioned, but particularly the self-compassion people forget because they think, oh, well, yes, okay, I'll give that to myself when I deserve it. And also to flip that on its head as well, because we are making this practical, as I'm sure you know all too well, when people give themselves a self-compassion, when they have fun, when they apply some of those things, they end up achieving more anyway. I mean, that's the irony. You end up doing better than when you're kind of whipping yourself along, as I used to, figuratively, not literally, but in that sense. And so I do feel that's valuable to company. I mean, it's valuable to any aspect of life, as we said, with the family, with anything, but especially within the company mindset, which leads me quite nicely to some of the other work you do in terms of working with people with learning difficulties and working in prisons as well, and as I think I said at the beginning, really sharing these practices with people who need them the most. And I say that, I'm not sure everyone will know what I mean. And what I mean by that is simply that a lot of people with this or with any spiritual practice preach very much to the converted. They exist very much in an environment where everyone believes what I believe, so therefore, we'll all agree with each other and we'll all get along very nicely. But as the practices come into real fruition in difficult situations, they come into fruition stressful or conflicting or anything that challenges a person, as they don't always come just when you're sitting there and everything's going wonderful. Similarly, the fact that you're putting yourself in an environment where it might be the first time people have heard about these kind of things. They may have mixed feelings to what this all means. Is it a religious thing? What are you going to be teaching me, and all of this? But it allows you to break down those barriers and really reach people who need it. I'd like to go a little bit deeper into, first of all, the context of how some of that works. So, in simple terms, where you teach, because I've rattled off a couple of things. And for anyone who doesn't know the answer, in terms of the learning difficulties, in terms of which kinds of institutions or areas you're teaching. Maybe that's in the NHS and with the prisons as well, I think is very relevant because that's totally misunderstood. I mean, I've had, well, I mean, when I grew up, a lot of people went down that path. But even in terms of this context, I've interviewed a number of people who were ex-criminals, ex-gangsters, and all sorts of stuff, and now they're doing something positive. And it's amazing to hear how much of that comes from conditioning, comes from trauma, comes from, well, basically from suffering, doesn't it? It comes from their suffering that then spills out onto other people. But I've gone off on a tangent with that question. But suffice to say, to simplify it, can you share with us a little bit about what you do in those areas as well, please? Dear my friend, thank you.
Thank you, my dear friend. Uh, so let's take prison as one example. Um, yeah, I've, I've been doing that for a while. Yeah. So what do I do? So people began to hear some of the work that I was doing. Mersey, remember I spoke about the work with an NHS trust, and some people heard about that and asked us to begin working in high secure places. So I'd started to do that type of work, and then some people in prisons began to realise that it was working in high secure mental health services and low secure, medium secure services. So it might also work in prison, this mindfulness thing that people didn't really always always understand. Um, so what do I do? The first thing I do is embody what I'm going to talk about. So I don't talk about it, but I love, I I genuinely love working in prisons, and I love working with people with learning disabilities and learning difficulties. And the reason I love it is you can't fool people with whatever courses, qualifications, and very skilled language and intellect you're going to put out. They'll look you in the eye, they'll look how your body is, and they'll know how you are. Because language isn't the first thing that some people go for. So the first thing I do is I don't talk too much. I walk around as somebody with certain clearances. I walk around the prison. I just walk around. I don't do a lot. I just walk around and talk to people that are suffering. I hold groups so people can practice mindfulness. But once again, it's only after a while of people being a bit curious about who this bloke is that walks around quite slowly and doesn't seem to be fazed by difficulties and challenges. Perhaps people acting out in ways that might be frightening to some people. So what's going on here? There's this bloke and he's wandering around and things are going down. And he's still got quite often, if it's appropriate, a smile on his face. Um, and so I start holding groups and people keep coming along to them. And once again, I don't talk too much. I just practice a bit like we did earlier. And so some people get it and we talk about it. And I've got a wicked sense of humor. So when I hear a few jokes, I don't put on airs and graces. I'm ex-army. I'll laugh. I won't pretend I'm not amused by it. And after a while, a bond, a bit like Liam and I hadn't met each other, but we get on. We get on. That type of stuff happens. And I don't try to give them any soft soap. And after a while, trust, because there's often lack of trust in prison, begins to form. And they might make jokes about the mindfulness stuff. And if I find it funny, I'll laugh. But I'll still get up and I'll do the mindful walking and I'll still do give people about 20 minutes meditation. And then I'll go to the wings and the prison cells and deal with the really, really acute suffering. And after a while, word gets around. So that's what I do in prisons. And to a lesser extent, is what I do in other environments. Obviously, when we're with very clever people who read research, who are very skeptical, then we use other methods around the data and the research that I suspect a number of you on this call know about. But it doesn't work with everybody. You've got to embody it. You've got to be it. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a book about being peace. And the way you be peace is you become it. And then you go out and go into difficult situations, as he did in the Vietnamese War. He'd go into villages that had been bombed and he'd build them up again. And he'd offered education when bullets were flying. Literally, when bullets were flying, he'd go in, but he'd still have that calm presence because he practiced. Yeah, so I take that prison work and I put it into other environments. Got some money to help service to adapt it for people with learning disabilities. Same work, it's the same type of thing in businesses. Yeah, I'll leave it there, my friend, but ask more questions if you're.
Absolutely. I'm just amazed by it. As I said, I mean, I think it's wonderful because these situations with the learning disabilities as well, where people often feel ostracized and so forth, and there's a degree of sort of an outcast quality, with this, which it shouldn't be. But the fact that then you're engaging with people with humanity, I think is absolutely fantastic because even with that, with prisons, I mean, it's so misunderstood, isn't it? I mean, I've found in my own life that some of the most troubled people in that regard have the deepest wounds. They only have the deepest wounds. They're not. People say to me, even with interviews or with other things, with some, as I mentioned earlier, Liam, how do you sit down with people like that? And I say, well, because in a way, I can see through it because I understand how they got there to a certain extent. Yeah, they might have certain different lived experiences, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I understand how they got there. And often, when I talk to people, I share about some of my school experiences or some of the things, they find it relatable. And what you're doing where you embody what you teach is what I was saying at the beginning. That's what I meant at the beginning because you really do. And you really are the change that you wish to see. And going back to Thai as well, I mean, yes, I read that the Vietnam War and standing up for these things, and even the work he was doing at one point with the boat people and some of these things. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, I mean, this is really in action. And it was one of the first times in my own life of embracing, okay, being gentle doesn't mean you're being weak, but you can be gentle and be strong and powerful at the same time. And that was another revelation for me because I've always been very gentle and quite sensitive. But growing up, you kind of feel like, well, I don't really want to show that to people because, the world's the way it is and so forth. And that's very much a perception, and that's something I love about what you're doing and what you embody by the way, Dean, is you have the strength there, and but you have the gentleness and the compassion together. And what you were saying there about the whole ex-army thing, and that's the only thing when I was joking really, and I said, oh, it's hard to imagine that, but in a way, but actually no, that's the only thing I'll correct because I can feel the strength that you have, even when you're talking about the sort of corporate world or running businesses, combined with the compassion and combined with the gentleness, actually. And that's something that I think is really wonderful about what you personally embody. And although with Ty as well, although I didn't meet him in the same way you did, I must say from the videos, I can feel a lot of power there as well as the gentleness. I mean, it's actually quite phenomenal. And I remember hearing him speak the first time, I was thinking, wow, I mean, I've never felt this kind of combination before. So again, like I said earlier about which one was I talking about at that time? Well, going into the prisons aspect, I'd like to go deeper. Like I said about the corporate world, that's what it was. And I said that there's certain preconceived ideas that people think they have. There are certain preconceived ideas people think about prisons as well, and they think about how people got there, regardless of the offence. I mean, they're not always violent offences, they're all kinds of things. But there is quite a strong judgment, quite a strong stigma. I mean, I've met a lot of people where they get out the other side and they struggle to get jobs and they have all sorts of issues that society puts on them. What are some of the things people can do with regards to mindfulness to change the crime rate. So, for example, you look at London now, you look at the stabbings, and you look at the, people don't feel safe after dark. I would often go there to work when I was doing the football journalism, and it's true. I mean, you don't always feel safe on the street. And I go out at night here, walk, and people say, "Liam, you're in Cyprus. I mean, it's near to Israel, it's near to all these places where there's war zones. Do you feel safe?" I said, "Well, I feel a lot safer than I did in the UK, and the thing is, you can feel safe anywhere. But going back to my point is, that there seems to be an epidemic of that as well. There seems to be an epidemic, particularly with violent crime, and this is one of the reasons why I said that Thai's teachings and mindfulness in general are more relevant than ever before, because we have a mental health crisis, we have particularly with stress and anxiety, we have an addiction crisis, I would say, and we have a violent crime type of crisis. And I've been looking at this thing, not to go off on a tangent, but you'll find this interesting. When I'm living in Cyprus, and people have guns here. People have guns are legal. People can have things, but there's no crime. People can have. You walk in a shop like a convenience store, and they sell where they have like chewing gum and lollipops and all these things by the counter. They have knuckle dusters as well, but you can just buy them. And I was looking at that thinking, gosh, okay. But then the streets are so safe, and I was thinking, what is it that's different about here that in the UK people can't control themselves? And I don't really know the answer to that question, but I do feel that some of your teachings will be relevant to that. And I say your teachings, what you embody, Thai's teachings, the lineage, all of it will come into that concept. But again, it's quite a big question. But I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well, please, my friend, because a lot of people feel that the culture in the UK has changed, and I feel you have something to share with regards to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thai would say, Thich Nhat Hanh would say that we need to build communities of resistance.
Mm,
Communities of resistance. So what does he mean by that? Once again, it's simple. So we come together, a bit like you're doing, Liam. We come together with people with similar mindsets, people that wish to have some peace in their lives, in their families' lives, in their communities' lives, and are willing to take action to achieve that community of resistance. So
mm,
are willing to find a way to make life simpler, to find a way to make life more peaceful. And we can't do it alone. We have to do it with other people. So, yes, I practice alone sometimes, but quite often I'll discuss, as Liam and I are doing now, with other people with similar aspirations to have a peaceful life, a happy life. What I mean by happy life is that I'm not I'm not triggered by some of my old seeds,
mm,
anger, jealousy, greed, fear. I'm not triggered. And the reason I'm not triggered is because when I sit on the cushion, when I walk in the wood, when I talk with friends like Lee, I can help transform them. I can transform them by recognizing that they're there, by accepting, not pushing them away, but accepting those seeds, those unhelpful seeds of anger. Let's take anger, for example. So I identify, anger's here. I accept it, and then I embrace it. So I really get a feel about what that anger's doing to me. In my case, it would tense my body, and what would come into my head were thoughts of being a victim. So therefore, I wanted to hit out, yeah. And then I'd look at, after I'd done that, I'd breathe with it, I'd embrace it, I'd breathe with it, or I'd walk with it, or I'd just wait until I calm down. And then I'd look at the triggers. So why has that arisen? Obviously, there'd be the long-term triggers from trauma, from whatever, from perhaps my DNA, but then there'd be the short-term triggers, which would, that person said that, or this happened, or something was unsatisfactory for me. So, and then I'd look at how I could change that situation when my mind was calm. So that's a 5 point method to a very practical way to
Mm,
deal with the environment that sometimes makes us feel unsafe. Recognize, accept, embrace, breathe, calm down, look deeply, act. So those 5 things are very something that's very, and then hang around with other people that have a similar approach, not running away from the difficult stuff. Yeah. And are willing to, as Liam and I did a little bit before this video, we can talk about it. And by doing that, you build up communities of resistance,
mm,
resistance from the outside influences that might be bringing up anger, bringing up the challenges that we face today.
mm,
Communities of resistance. Having, we would call it Sangha, but you don't need to call it Sangha. You could call it a community of practice. When I was working in the NHS, doing the work I mentioned earlier, we'd have groups where 10 minutes before a shift, nurses, doctors would sit 10 minutes in the restroom, just breathe in and out, have a chat about fears, anxieties, onto the ward, into the hospital. You can do it in the companies, you can do it in prison, you can do it. Yeah, yeah, that's the one main one. Communities of resistance.
yeah, makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, I'll be listening back to this, making notes. I think, I mean, it's even for my own practice. But all joking aside, I mean, it is so valuable because the reason I focused in on that aspect, I mean, this applies to any life area, but we're using examples here. We're using the corporate example. We're using the prison example to illustrate this in different forms. But yeah, I mean, the reason I'm focusing on the prison example is because it's a really potent, powerful example of how this applies. I mean, if you look at an offence is a violent offence, you speak to those people, and again, you've probably spoken to more than I have, but even from the ones I've spoken to, you think, well, okay, you felt angry. What was the gap there between thinking of doing whatever you did and doing it? Usually not much. But then people say, okay, well, that doesn't apply to something that's more calculated. So, you take a drug dealer or whatever, but that's still suffering because even going back to what you said earlier about even in your own life, not having much money and being driven to succeed in the sort of conventional sense, really a lot of this is still comes from that. I mean, a lot of, for example, people selling drugs or doing something like that still comes from, well, I'm suffering, I don't want to suffer anymore. Unfortunately, then they end up suffering more because it's misguided. But at the same time, that really illustrates what I was saying earlier, where a lot of the social ills that we have could actually be significantly reduced or even solved by the application of mindfulness, including the mental health crisis, which I must admit, I personally feel a lot of it comes from stress, a lot of it comes from mismanagement of stress, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from society putting people in a position where they feel that they don't have time to feel their feelings, if that makes sense, and certainly even in my own life when I was younger, I would kind of feel something but push it to the side and think, well, I don't have time for that now. I have to get on with X, Y, and Z, whatever I'm doing, to move forward. And then obviously when you start the practices, it comes up later or it comes up in an unhealthy form originally. And when you start the practices, you can work with it in a healthy form and release that. But that's why I say, because even it doesn't have to be with prisoners, as we were saying, even in the workplace, even in any type of environment, understanding a lot of the things you shared, the interbeing and understanding self-compassion, self-awareness, etc. I do feel there's a lack of self-awareness in the world today. There's very much a lack of, well, why do I do what I do? And people don't know. I mean, I mentioned the addiction crisis earlier. I mean, I have so many friends who struggled with that. I've never really gone down that road, but I know so many people who have, and a lot of it's, they don't know why they feel that way. They feel an emotion that's out of their control, and they feel they have to do something to put the brakes on, that being usually a substance. But then, of course, that makes it worse. So this is why I think the work you're doing is so powerful, following on Ty's legacy in this way, because you are taking these practices to where they are needed, and that's what he was doing. And I really feel that you follow in the footsteps. It's not really a question, Dean. I'm just saying from me to you, you follow in those footsteps because you are taking this, as I said earlier, out of the perceived sort of safety zone where I'm in the monastery and everyone feels the same way I do. So it's all very nice. And yes, that's necessary. But then this has to be taken into the world. And this might be controversial to say, but I've often said that Buddhism needs more people like that. I mean, it needs more the combination of the gentleness and the power, not, I mean, Christians and other people are very good at, singing from the rooftops. And when I'm talking about this, people need, regardless of the religious sense, by the way, even if we're talking about mindfulness in an entirely secular manner, just to be clear for our audience, we need that in the corporate space, the prison space, the workspace, the school, our education system. I mean, people spend however many years going through the school system learning about all sorts of other things, but never learning about themselves. I mean, they don't spend any particular time looking inwards. Why do I feel this way? Why am I good at this and not good at that? Instead, teachers encourage competition or comparison, actually, I mean to say, oh, well, because I'm not good at maths like that kid, and, I'm better at making something with my hands, or I'm better at whatever. Oh, well, I don't measure up then, and say, well, no, you have a talent that comes out in a different way. And talking about interbeing, we need all of those talents in society, not just the academic people. And going back to what you said about MBAs, really, I mean, they do try and force people into one box when there's went through self-awareness. We could have different boxes. So I've gone off on a tangent, but then that is why I think that the work you're doing is so meaningful, because it applies to literally changing the social fabric, by changing the way that people interact with themselves and with each other. Now, when it comes to this type of work and doing this kind of work, as we come to the latter phase, as we come up to sort of on the hour mark, where would you like to take this from here, Dean? Because I know that you, obviously, the present moment is the only moment that we have, so we can't take this too far ahead. But I'm drawn to feeling that we also do need to talk about the future, because people focus very much on the work that you've done, and I also feel there's a lot more that you will do. There's a lot more places that you will take this. I mean, even if you look at Ty, I mean, 95 years. I mean, I know he did have obviously some poor health towards the end there, but still, it's a long time to make an impact. And I would like to talk about, where you would like to take some of this work from this point forward. And I think we'll probably wrap up with that, because it's enough for people to take in. But I would like to give that a mention. So thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So one place I'd like to take this further is around leadership.
Mm,
As you know, Liam, because I know you've interviewed a few of my dear friends and colleagues from Insight Leadership, a small community interest company that is looking how we can authentically uh, bring mindfulness, secular mindfulness, yes, encouraged by Thai, but secular mindfulness that can reach leaders individually and collectively. Because if you remember, I was talking about collective leadership when I was talking about the example within the NHS, that it takes more than one individual. So I'd very much like to explore, which I'm beginning to do with some very skilled people around how we can move into using mindfulness to improve the quality and the ethics of leadership. I'd like, yeah, I'd like that to be something that we definitely think about think about doing, and to make it authentic, to make it authentic. I can remember when I when I joined my Zen tradition of Thai. So here was this lad from the council estate, black. Um, I hadn't found education at the time. Obviously, done that, but no. Um, and nobody looked like me. Nobody spoke like me. Nobody dressed like me. And as much as I could see and hear that this idea of mindfulness was useful, it wasn't speaking to me in authentic ways to reach this being that I am. And I think we have some work to do within the leadership world to make mindfulness authentic to to leaders, to use the right language, to embody it in a way where it can be heard. Yeah, I think that's where.
Well, you see, this is what I said at the beginning is I just have a feeling sometimes, a lot of times, to go in a different direction, or not so much a different direction, but you don't know which direction. And I just had that strong feeling that there's a lot more. It's kind of obvious in a way because yes, inside leadership and what you're doing at the moment, it does illustrates everything you said there. But yes, leadership. I mean, in so many ways. What you said about the collective leadership there, it's so valuable. People don't realize that. People look at one individual, and it is a whole ecosystem, absolutely. I think that's very, very, very valuable. And that's part of the reason I was speaking about these leadership positions, business, the corporate world, any type of leadership, but also the fact that you lead by example. You lead by example personally, Dean, I must say, and that I think is so wonderful because it is much needed. And as I've already said, I think I've already people get the gist of my views, but this is more needed to ease people's suffering than ever before. And I will also say that with these interviews, I'm not really advocating the Buddhist path as such. I'm just advocating self-awareness in particular, and then the extensions from that will move in different directions for different people. But I'm not saying to anybody that you have to be a Buddhist, but I am saying that breathing mindfulness is pretty much an essential ingredient that you should look into for any of our audience that's not familiar as a building block of a meaningful life, because as we've already established, the more we're aware of ourselves and the more we're aware of others, magic, real magic, in the true sense of the word, does start to happen from that. But I just also felt the feeling to say that I'm not saying be a Buddhist. And, this is the other thing, Dean. I mean, with yourself, you're out there in the world. I mean, you obviously, as you said, you're married, you have a family, you pay bills, you do all the normal things, as do I. And that is also valuable, immensely valuable, because the people might have been thinking early on, thinking, oh, do I have to go and join a monastery and give everything up and all of this sort of stuff? But because again, as a Thai, even though he obviously was fully a monk, but still so engaged in life, and I think that is. It sounds simple, but I think the application of that is so beautifully profound. And I will also say as well to our audience that anyone who wants to know more about this, obviously, Ty's teachings are out there extensively. I mean, he needs no introduction from myself. If you haven't heard about this before, please Google him. And there's so many books, so many teachings out there. But also, Dean, with the work that you're doing with Insight Leadership, I mean, I connected with you on LinkedIn. I suppose for the purposes of this, people reaching out to you to do these talks in prisons and schools and so forth, you do need to give yourself a little plug there. I mean, you do need to mention how people can actually find you, because some people listening to this, um, they will resonate very much with, not only with the teachings, but with you as an individual, and that's the other thing. Like what you were saying there about the prisons, or about certain environments where you're working, and people think, well, who is this guy? Where does he come from? What sort of makes him tick? And they want to reach out more. People have heard about that today, but from your presence, I think some people will want to say, okay, we need this in whichever institution they're involved in. And particularly with the youth, because I do a lot of work with the youth. But anyone who wants to change, anyone who wants to follow a different path, how can they get hold of you? I mean, what's the what's the simplest way to do that?
So for me, I'm afraid it's email, I'm afraid. So you can get me on Dene, but Dene's spelled differently than most. It's D-E, you can see it on the D-E-N-E. So Dene at Plum Village, all one word, .uk, not .co.uk, .uk. So Dene at plumvillage.uk, and I'll respond. I'm also on LinkedIn if you just put my name.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I only say that because, the community aspect. I mean, that builds the community aspect you were talking about earlier, and the resistance and so forth, and the different things that you mentioned, because people have a like mind, and it's not even a like mind, is it? I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but when I personally found Thai's teachings, it resonated with me on such a deep level of thinking, there's somebody who, as I said earlier, they've got the gentleness and the power, they've got some of the traits, he had some of the traits I felt naturally an affinity with, if that makes sense. But also a lot of things I aspired to be, and I thought, oh, when I grow up, I want to be like Thai, all joking aside. But it's hard to explain. But I feel that some people will just feel the resonance with you, Dean. It's not a logical thing of all. There is a lot of the left brain aspects of what you do and why it works and how it'll work and all the rest of it. But there is just that feeling of where you embody what you, not even what you teach, but what you embody it by being, what you are. Some people will connect with that, so it's valuable to build that community, which is why I mentioned that question. But I must say, this has been a joy. I mean, I knew that it would be good. I am going to say that I knew it would be good. If we got on here and if it had been terrible, I would have been very shocked, because I heard, I've heard some of your talks. I thought, all right, but this has honestly exceeded my expectations in terms of the practical application of this wisdom, the way that we've connected, as if we've met before. That's been a joy as well. I mean, it's been absolutely wonderful. So I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have. And thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing everything that you've shared from your heart, because I really believe it will help many people, and it will touch and connect with the right people at the right time, which is what I always say. The beauty of a podcast is it's out there, and obviously it sort of builds over time. Um, and the right people, I believe, come across these things, and they're at the point of readiness. So thank you for all of those things, and it's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, Liam. I'm really glad we've connected. Really glad.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.